have the most goofy, ridiculous conversations. We had inside jokes that made no sense whatsoever, and we were always joking and giggling together. We'd spend hours in almost nonstop laughter with these nonsensical conversations about puddles and stars and fish that I couldn't explain even if I wanted to, because I'm not lying when I say they don't make sense. There's no actual point to them. If you looked at only these conversations and at nothing else in our friendship, you would think that our friendship was quite different than it actually was. But there were conversations that we knew about that no one else did. You see, after the sun went down, after everyone else had probably gone to bed, after we couldn't tell if it was late night or early morning, something would shift. In the deep darkness of the night, our conversations changed. In the stillness of 2 a.m., our tone shifted from silly and happy to pensive and contemplative. The topic changed from puddles to our deepest fears and desires, our hopes for the world, our unanswered questions about life and the universe that would likely remain unanswered for our lifetime, but we would puzzle through them together. I treasure those late nights with Kate. Those were the nights where even though it was dark, I felt seen and heard, and like I could tell her anything. Those were the nights where I could set aside everything that might have been holding me back in the daylight and just let it out. While it's harder now to stay up that late than it was at 19, I think there's something to be said about the nature of the deep night that opened our relationship up to new ways of knowing each other. The night led us to some of our most vulnerable, curious, and daring conversations. And I think Nicodemus knew this. Nicodemus had a life that appeared one way in the daylight, in the public eye. He was a Pharisee, a leader of the Jews. And unlike Kate and I, whose embodied and lived friendship didn't really depend on the thoughts or reactions of the people around us, Nicodemus had a very specific role in society. Things were expected of him. Talking to Jesus, admitting that he believed that God was present with Jesus, seeking Jesus out with questions that weren't trying to discredit him, that was not what was expected of Nicodemus. Nicodemus had questions that he needed answered, even though they weren't what he was supposed to be asking. So he came to Jesus by night. Now, there's a lot of speculation as to why he did this. Maybe Jesus was super busy and didn't have time to meet with anyone unless they came by night. It's possible. Maybe he was ashamed. In fact, a lot of people have interpreted Nicodemus's actions this way, saying that he was ashamed to show his faith in the light of day for all to see, and that Jesus knew this and inexplicably mocked him because of it. If you read their interaction through this lens of Nicodemus's shame and Jesus' judgmental response, that's exactly what you're going to get. Shame and judgment. Are you a teacher of Israel and yet you do not understand these things? If I have told you about earthly things and you don't believe, then how can you believe if I tell you about heavenly things? People who read the story in this way often point out that Nicodemus becomes increasingly more public in his faith as the book of John goes on. In chapter 7, he shows up to prevent Jesus from being arrested, and in chapter 19, he shows up with Joseph of Arimathea to provide the spices to prepare Jesus' body for burial after the crucifixion. They praise his change from hiding his faith in the night to publicly supporting Jesus in the light of day. But maybe when he came by night, it just wasn't yet time for everyone else to be in on it. Maybe nighttime is a great time to ask questions that you're too nervous to ask in the day. The dark is safer somehow with intimate conversations. It's less judgmental. Barbara Brown Taylor, in her book Learning to Walk in the Dark, talks about full solar spirituality and lunar spirituality. Full solar spirituality is so often lifted up as the ultimate goal in spirituality. She says it focuses on staying in the light of God around the clock, both absorbing and reflecting the sunny side of faith. She says that the danger of full solar spirituality is that it tucks all the sinister stuff into the dark part, identifying God with only the sunny part and leaving you to deal with the rest on your own time, in secret, in the night. The shame read into Nicodemus' story is the result of a world that expects positive attitudes, a constant sense of divine presence, and unwavering faith. It is not only unrealistic to expect spiritual perfection, though, it's unhealthy. The sun does not shine all the time. It's not supposed to. Even in areas in higher latitudes that experience midnight sun and a sun that never sets in the summer, experience darkness the rest of the year. So Barbara Brown Taylor offers up lunar spirituality instead as a new way to look at it. She describes lunar spirituality as one in which the divine light available to me waxes and wanes with the season. She says darkness is not dark to God. The night is as bright as the day. Lunar spirituality does not call doubt, fear, or shame bad. Instead, it opens us up to realizing the full presence of God, even in the midst of our darkness. So much so that we cannot call it anything but good, just as God has called all creation good. So what if we look at Nicodemus's approaching in the night as part of the waxing and waning of lunar spirituality? What if we read this interaction not through a lens of empathy, or not through a lens of judgment, but through a lens of empathy, or even humor? Jesus' responses become not judgmental, but profoundly caring. Are you a teacher of Israel, and yet you don't understand these things? You mean you don't know everything there is to know? If I have told you about earthly things and you don't believe, then how can you believe if I tell you about heavenly things? I'm going to need you to trust me on this. Looking at it this way leaves room not only for Nicodemus's imperfection and ignorance, but for our imperfection and ignorance. It not only makes it part of the conversation, but it makes it valid and okay not to understand. Jesus, after all, shows us time and time again that he is not particularly concerned about us understanding things. Experiencing the darkness of night and all that it entails cannot separate you from the love of God. Doubt, fear, shame, questions, pulling back or taking space away, all of these are a normal part of our waxing and waning lives of faith. Sometimes we, like Nicodemus, come to Jesus in the night. Whether literally or figuratively, we have all experienced a nighttime like this. But the night is a great time for conversations. The night led my friend Kate and I to deeper friendship. The night led Nicodemus to Jesus to ask questions that he might not have asked otherwise. And the night isn't only a place of questions or doubt or fear, it's also a place of storytelling. The night holds profound creative power. Just think of the stories told around campfires. Nicodemus's questions led to some storytelling from Jesus that contained some stunning truths that were found in that night. He learned that God loves the world so much that God sent Jesus, not to condemn us, but to save us, to give us eternal life. He learned that we can be born of water and of spirit, that the Spirit of God is always with us, even though we don't know where she comes from or where she's going. In baptism, we're born of water and spirit, and God promises to always be with us. God is present with us in the light of day, yes, but God is especially present with us in the dark of night. And whether you are in the midst of your own night or day right now, God is with you, and God sees you. And as the sun goes down and the darkness sets in, know that God is ready for a great conversation that can only come by night. Amen.
Amen.